or you have an issue, you can pick up the phone and call him, and I guarantee you he'll take care of it. As a M&T customer, I've used that before, and he really does a fantastic job. I don't know whether you saw in the BBJ a couple weeks ago and talked about how the riots didn't affect the banks. Augie had a great picture. You got to quit using the college photo, though, Augie. He looks like James Bond there a little bit, doesn't he? Great photo. Let me tell you a little bit about the guy, because he is really a unique individual. He joined M&T Bank as an executive associate back in 1993 and has performed a number of senior line as well as staff positions throughout the entire organization. Since relocating to Baltimore with M&T's acquisition of Allfirst in 2002, that was a very interesting deal, if you all remember about that, Augie has led M&T's small business efforts throughout Maryland, D.C., and Northern Virginia, and has managed the middle market large corporate banking division for the Baltimore region. Prior to the current assignment, he was responsible for leading a multi-year strategic review of the bank's lending as well as deposit business across M&T Bank. He holds a BA from Boston University. He has an MBA from the University of Chicago, and he is the board chair for the Economic Alliance of the Greater Baltimore organization, and he serves on the board of the Baltimore Development Corporation, the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, Center Stage, the University of Maryland Medical System, and the Greater Baltimore Committee. To say the least, he's a very busy man. And like the old axiom says, folks, if you want something done, you ask a busy man to do it. Please welcome, everybody, Augie Chiasera.
Doug, thanks so much for your kind remarks. You know, in full disclosure, Doug's a friend, and he's also a customer. So, Doug, thank you very much for your business. I really appreciate it, and please feel free to call me anytime. And it's kind of fun to see many of you who do business with us as well. It's a real pleasure and a real honor to take care of you. You know, I initially agreed to do this out of respect for my relationship with Doug, and then when I started to sort of think about what I want to talk about today, I thought there was a chance for us to maybe have sort of a deeper conversation about this community and the role that I think we can play in moving us forward. So let me explain. You know, it was back in 2002, as Doug had mentioned, when my wife and I relocated to the Baltimore area through the bank's acquisition of Allfirst, the old First National Bank of Maryland. You know, my role at the time was to head up all the integration work that the bank was doing for the commercial lines of business, a role I had played for a number of our acquisitions. And I can tell you, from the moment I arrived here in Baltimore, I absolutely fell in love with the city. You know, I was so impressed with what I saw, cranes building things versus being kind of a sign of destruction. You know, tourist attractions within walking distance. I lived at the time over in Federal Hill in some temporary housing when we first came down here. You know, tourist attractions within walking distance of what I think are two of the finest sports stadiums in the NFL and Major League Baseball. You know, and also just the great proximity to major urban centers like Philadelphia and Washington. You know, and as a banker, you know, I play sort of a unique role, really, of preserving and protecting the deposits of our customers who have worked so hard to collect them, and also helping many businesses in our community use those deposits to help grow their own franchise or grow their own enterprises. You know, so to that end, I was very eager to hear from the business community about what it is that makes this community special, you know? So when I asked businesses to sort of give me the source and give me the story about what it is that is the reason for the kind of growth that we see in Baltimore, you know, I heard story after story about how the growth that we experienced here lagged that of D.C. or lagged that of Philadelphia, and it just wasn't enough. And you know, when I ask community leaders to talk about the level of diversity that you see in this community, in this town, I heard story after story about all the ways that we came up short in terms of diversity. And what's amazing to me is every time I asked question after question, this community here found a way to describe in some humble perspective just how we weren't blank enough. We weren't big enough, we weren't progressive enough, we weren't, you fill in the blank, enough. So, just out of curiosity, just through a sort of a show of hands, and this is always risky to do, how many of you think that we as a community can act in a different way, or should act in a different way, based on what we've kind of gone through over the past year or so? Right, I think there are a fair number of hands. And I learned something at that point when I started asking questions of our business leaders. And I think what I learned is that I always thought it was facts that drove actions. That in fact, if you tell somebody enough about what the reality is, about where they live, and what those facts represent, you walk out, you count the number of cranes, you see the number of boats, you see the sort of activity going on in the street, that's enough for people to act in a different way. But I was horribly wrong in that. It is really not so much the facts, but our beliefs in terms of how we support those facts that create feelings in each of us that ultimately cause us to act in a particular way. So put another way, it's what's far more important are our beliefs about what we see that drive our feelings, which cause actions. It's a pretty simple formula in my mind. People will act in a way that's consistent with their beliefs, regardless of the facts. So hold on to that thought just for a sec. So as Doug had mentioned, for the past year, I've been the chair of the Economic Alliance here in Greater Baltimore. And it's our mission to promote the Greater Baltimore region as a world-class city to live, work, learn, and invest. And among a number of sort of research activities that we get involved in, we routinely conduct executive missions to other communities and other towns to see what they're doing, what they've got going on. This year we made a trip to Detroit, Michigan. And we made that trip to Detroit to see what is really behind all the positive press that community has received over the past 6, 9, 12 months. We had the chance to spend some time with the head of the Chamber of Detroit, and he had spent some time in D.C. working for the Bush administration, so he was very familiar with Baltimore, and he was very familiar with the Maryland area in general. And he was pretty eager to talk with us about what it is that we wanted to talk about. And he shared with us sort of this fantastic story about how he finally got some change and movement happening in the Detroit area. And he sort of cited two stories. He said one he cited was an interview that he had with the Los Angeles Times. And to put this into perspective, this was just after Detroit had declared bankruptcy, and they had kind of crafted this grand bargain between the state and the art museum and so on. And he said, he was quoted as saying, the best way to solve our PR problem in Detroit is to solve the problem. Period. And then he went on in November of 2013, he was speaking at the City Club of Portland. And his name is Sandy Barua. Sandy made the claim, and I quote this, he said, the situation in Detroit is not as bad as it seems. It is in fact actually far worse. And what struck me with his remarks and his recounting of the story, and you hear this told by the business owners and the community at Detroit at large, that it took a level of clarity and honesty, and I dare say sort of vulnerability, to clearly state, there's a problem, let alone actually getting into the specifics of what those problems are so you can go on to fixing them. And I think it's this very notion of vulnerability that in so many ways can give us the clarity to articulate what it is that's wrong and then get on with sort of fixing the problem. So here is the problem when I think a little bit about where we are here in the sort of Baltimore region is, being honest about what really needs to change is really hard, I think, for any of us to do. To be honest with friends and family and the community about what really worries you is tough business, but it's only, I think, through this level of honesty with each other and one another that we can actually find our way through some of the issues that I think we're facing as a community. As the board chair of an organization whose job it is to promote this region as a world-class city to live, work, learn, and invest, the civil unrest last April and the murder rate in 2015 has made my job and our organization's job a little tricky, to say the least. It's funny, based on some analysis done by the Baltimore Development Corporation that was just released a couple of weeks ago, there were just over 400 businesses that were impacted by the riots that happened in April. And well over 90% of each of those businesses since then have been not only given, many of them have given interest-free loans by the Baltimore Development Corporation, but have also reopened and are functioning in many ways as they were before. But that story seems to be lost on a lot of folks. As I did some research here, since April 27th, 2015, there have been 95,900 media reports on the Baltimore riots. 95,900. A Pew Research Center survey conducted between April 30th and May 5th asked respondents to reflect on media coverage of the unrest, Freddie Gray's death, and the protests overall. 44% of respondents reported that there was too much coverage of unrest and violence, while 37% of respondents reported that there was too little coverage of the nonviolent protests that happened. This level of exposure, unfortunately, had to have an absolutely outsized impact on what people believed about our community. In fact, I'd ask you to take a look at a messaging statement analysis for Baltimore completed May 8th. You've got this in the packets we handed out. If you go to that first slide, this was some research that was commissioned by the Baltimore, the National Aquarium. I don't think it was done by them. I think it was commissioned by them. But basically what it is it's a media statement analysis of all the Twitter accounts and emails and sort of national narrative about Baltimore in that 1 week following the activity that had gone on. And as you can see in that graphic, the way that the city ends up being portrayed can be a very, very difficult hill to climb. Particularly in light of when you think about my comments earlier, that what it ultimately is beliefs about what we sort of see, facts that ultimately drive, our feelings and ultimately impact our actions. That basically people act consistent with their beliefs, regardless of what the facts happen to be. And it's funny. I think this is going to sound odd, but I think many of you have seen this commercial that I'm on with M&T, right? And I can't tell you how many folks sort of stop me when they know. I say, "Oh, hey, I saw you on the commercial." I'm on that TV commercial for maybe 4 seconds, 3 seconds. So you look at sort of just the recognition of a guy being on a television commercial for 3 to 4 seconds, and then you look at the magnitude of over 95,000 media impressions over a certain event, compounded with the video expression that you get on CNN running 24/7 for 7 days a week. No wonder why there's this sort of vision in people's minds about what it is that happens in this community, regardless of what the reality is. And this, I think, is really part of our challenge here. So how do we change our beliefs? So here's my feeling. Back in November of 2014, the Economic Alliance had an annual meeting. We asked 20 local business leaders to join us and talk a little bit about what Baltimore means to them. And the stories were absolutely fantastic, if many of you had a chance to see them. I want to share a couple of them because I think they really get at the sort of sentiments and feelings here. So there's one gentleman, Darius McCoy, college student at CCBC. He shared, "Despite what some of the media says, I know Baltimore is a good place with lots of good people and companies that give lots of great opportunities." We then heard from Brooke Harlander, who works in the commercial real estate business, and she remarked, "I have never been in a place where I have met so many people that are crazy about their city as I have around Baltimore. The enthusiasm's absolutely contagious." And then Juan Gonzalez, enthusiastically described his relocation to Baltimore like this, quote, "I'm an engineer from a place where fancy universities don't exist, and I identify myself with Baltimore because I love the community, because I love that the community is aware of its challenges and works together laser-focused on changing its reality. I'm really excited to be here today working with talented people and institutions to create the next great American company with talented people and institutions to create the next great American company." So after the folks on stage shared their stories, we did a little bit of experiment. We said, okay, we had pieces of paper sort of laid out in front of everyone, and we said, we want you to write 2 things that you're grateful for in the Baltimore community. And the folks, so I came up with this idea about 9 hours before the annual meeting. So I called up Tom, who's the executive director. I said, hey, Tom, I got this idea. I said, what if we were to ask folks to write down what they're grateful for in Baltimore, because this is really a meeting dedicated to, sort of celebrating all that's special about this place. He said, yeah. I said, that's a great idea. I got to head off to a lunch, talk to my operations director. So at which point I talked to her, and I said, Shannon, I said, what do you think? She says, well, what if we tweet it? What if we have them go to a website? I said, well, no, I think we can go ahead and do it. They ultimately did it. So we ended up handing out sort of individual pieces of paper with a pen and asked folks to kind of share with us what it is that's special about Baltimore. And we heard things like, I love the spirit of the people, the passion of those that live and work here, small town feel, hope and opportunity. We collected over 300 responses from the attendees at the meeting. And if you look at that second page, I love this graphic because it is so powerful when you look at it in terms of what people think about this community, those that have lived here and worked here, raising their family here, and you compare that to what I believe this city really means and what this community really represents versus what we saw from the media reports back a year or so ago. So you see words like, community and culture and diversity and people and, great were the terms that came up most often in that word cloud analysis that we've done. So here's the deal, right? We've got this gulf now that exists between the picture of Baltimore portrayed by the media coverage of the unrest and the view of Baltimore that really is front and center, that each of us live every single day, that are very deeply invested here in this community. Pretty much business leaders like us. You and I make differences here in big ways, in small ways, and in positive ways and in negative ways. And I'll tell you, since the events of last April, I'm sure many of you oftentimes get asked the question, so how's Baltimore doing? And when I'm asked that question, I find myself kind of falling back into the same trap of kind of citing the statistics, talking about we're doing remarkably well, we rank number 2 in entrepreneurship, we rank number 4 nationally for STEM jobs, we're the 3rd fastest growing market for millennials. The problem is that people act consistent with what they believe and have no interest at all in what the facts happen to be. I'll continue by referencing sort of the convention business that we're having. The Boston, or the Urban League is, holding their annual meeting this year. We expect over 13,000 attendees to come to Baltimore in 2016. Estimated economic impact of $4.2 million. I think many of you heard about this first-time Light City event that's going to be going on in April. Major world-class operation that's going to be celebrating several significant building projects in downtown alone. We've got the rehab of 10 Light Street. You've got the work happening down at Sagamore, or at Port Covington, this being headed up by Sagamore Development. You've got the redevelopment of the Mechanic Theater site. Of course, you've got the Harbor Point redevelopment. But the problem is people are consistent and will think in a way that's consistent with their beliefs versus what the facts might happen to share with us. So my question, I think, to you, and the question I ask a lot of folks that I talk to, is how many of you really look for and really see all that is world-class about this community? There was this book I ran across 2 years ago, written by Alexandra Horowitz. It's a book called On Looking. It's a simple enough concept. She is she's a writer, obviously. She wrote a book. But this book, really, she decided that she was amazed. She had gone for a walk one day around her neighborhood in New York. And she had gone with somebody who hadn't been in this neighborhood before, and she was shocked by what this other person happened to see. So she'd lived here for all these years, and she's grown accustomed to what she should expect to see when she walked around her neighborhood walking her dog or whatnot. So she ended up walking around a series of sort of familiar neighborhoods over the course of however long it took her to walk around neighborhoods with 10 or 11 of the folks that she had profiled in the book. And what was amazing is all of the specific details and things that these professionals saw that she missed, which for me has been sort of a remarkable reminder that we're so used to expecting certain things. There are certain beliefs that we have about the way the world operates, or beliefs we have about this community, and unfortunately that is ultimately what's going to drive our actions, and we need to find a way to kind of get at sort of getting past what we think we know so well about our communities and about our markets, so that we can start really a new belief about this community. So much of this really depends on us as leaders, and I think for us to make the kind of change that we need to make, we got to start focusing more on the action piece. The problems I think that we experienced back in April of last year are way too big for any one organization to solve. And we need to start believing pretty clearly that we as a community have found ways to come together, get ourselves organized, and get on with the business that needs to get done. In addition to my work with the Economic Alliance, teams from the Downtown Partnership and the Greater Baltimore Committee and Visit Baltimore are attempting to bring business leaders together to talk about what it is that we can do to sort of get on with what the problems. So for example, if any of you know Michael Cryer, kind of the head of One Baltimore, he's done some great work. He had an op-ed piece in the Sun a couple of weeks ago. He's really working just to increase the number of Baltimoreans that can join in the progress and join in the success of our region. Now, he's really focused his agenda on two things that I would kind of urge you to find a way to get behind and support. First off, be a part of his efforts to create a job training program, okay, that will help employers match skills with employees that, frankly, are looking for jobs. And the second piece is encouraging companies and institutions to purchase goods and services from local businesses that will grow the revenue and hiring capacity of the city's small business community, period. And I think if we can find a way as institutions to get behind these two activities, it can go a long way in helping us get past sort of what we've experienced. So we need to support those efforts on One Baltimore so that we can help this community get past and get on with what we think we need to get on with. But I think for us to start making some real progress here, I think it's important to have honest dialogue about sort of what's happening for us and what's happening, I think, for each of our businesses. We need to unlock this dialogue, much like they did in Detroit, about trying to figure out what it is that each of us as business owners are worried about, nervous about. I do an exercise with some of our teams back at the bank here, and I will ask them certain questions about what is it that really makes you nervous or anxious, vulnerable when faced in a particular situation. We ask folks to write it down, and we get awesome feedback in terms of what it is that they're specifically worried about, which then allows us to get on with our job of making the environment a lot more conducive for them to get their job done in a way that isn't maybe so stress-filled or stress-packed, I had the same experience when we were sort of responding to some of the civic unrest back in April of 2015. We had made the decision on, this I think was a Monday, when things started to get, some of the unrest was happening. And we made the decision at 3 o'clock to close the bank and let folks go home if they want to go home, to get out of the city, which, many of us had kind of gotten together and thought that made it great. That was sort of a good thing to do, to allow our employees to kind of get out and get on their way. It wasn't until maybe 2 weeks after the fact we were kind of having roundtable conversations and discussions with people about how they felt, did it go well, not go well, that kind of stuff. And I had a woman tell me she relies on public transportation to get down from Edgewood, up in Harford County. And she said, I understand you closed the building at 3, but our express bus didn't leave until 4 o'clock. And, the express bus drop-off point is, 2 blocks closer to City Hall, which is where, some of the unrest was starting to happening. And I thought, wow, I didn't realize the extent to which, we unknowingly put, one of our employees in that spot. But knowing that from her, and her having the courage to kind of share it with us, allowed us to know the next time that we make decisions to close buildings, that we do it with the bus schedule in mind, so that we don't end up unwittingly putting our folks in sort of harm's way. I share that story with you because I think her courage in sort of sharing that concern and story with us gave us an opportunity to deal with the issue head on and really create something that was a lot better off in the long run. So here's how you could help me today. I've got a sheet of paper that we're going to kind of pass around. All right, and there's some pens on the table as well. And, the question at the top of the page is worded in a specific way to really see, to the extent that you're willing, to share with us what is it that really causes you to maybe feel vulnerable operating a city, or operating a company, or owning a company in Baltimore today. And, obviously this is anonymous, so if you don't want to share your name, please don't share. In fact, there's no place on that sheet for you even to share a name. But, knowledge is power. Data can help give us ideas about a direction to move. And my hope is, if you're willing to be honest in terms of sharing with us in an anonymous way what it is that really makes you nervous about running your business or operating your business in the Baltimore community, we can take it and we can see and share it with folks that hopefully can make a difference for you and make a difference for us. So why don't we just take, 30 seconds or 45 seconds, and I would just appreciate it if you could maybe write down sort of your thoughts about what it is that causes you to feel vulnerable, or what moments do you feel vulnerable when running or being the CEO of a company here in the Baltimore region. Doug, what I'll do is once we collect these, we'll make sure that we kind of capture them and we'll feed them back to you, so at least the group here, because I think part of the fun, if there's any fun about thinking about vulnerable experiences for ourselves, part of the fun of this experience is really to help each of you understand, when you look at the responses, that many of you are probably experiencing the same thing that others are in the room or others are at your table. And I think the more that we can collectively start talking about what it is that's troubling us, that's getting in the way of us getting done what we need to get done in support of our business and in support of our employees and in support of our communities, the faster we can get on with kind of, getting this moving in the right direction. So with that, Doug, those were kind of my remarks, and Phil's going to kind of walk around and pick up the sheets if you're done. Phil and Kearney, I guess, will pick those up. And like I said, with Doug, we'll go ahead and collate them, and then we'll bring them together and make sure that Doug has a copy to share with all of you, so at least you can see it. Because I found with this exercise, not only will you give us a lot of data about what it is that's really bothering you about this community and give us some data that we can point to for action, I also hope that when you read that list, you'll realize that you're not alone in terms of what you're struggling with or how you're feeling, and that maybe you can rely on one another to a greater extent to help get past some of the concerns that you have. So with that, Doug, I'm happy to open things up for questions.
Question, if you could repeat the question for the video too, when you get it, Augie, that'd be great.
Sure. The statement is, I am / feel vulnerable as a business owner / CEO of a company in the Baltimore region when ...
Okay, anybody have any questions? I'll kick it off if I could. You can repeat that for the camera too. Augie as well. You said you did that exercise with your employees.
Yep.
What was the preponderance of the feedback that you got in terms of,
Sure. I asked the employees, Doug asked a question, what were some of the responses that we got back from employees when we asked that question? And the question was, I am / feel vulnerable at M&T Bank or in this particular program when ... And the responses were absolutely fantastic. They ranged from, having compensation conversations with my boss, being in a group of highly educated fellow colleagues and not knowing the answer to a question. M&T Bank, for those of you that are a customer of ours, know that we have a committee process which causes you to talk about a customer's credit with a group of committee members. So being at a committee presentation, one of the bankers said, and, not knowing how to answer a question. Graduating from one of the best schools in the country and sitting in a classroom and not knowing, how to respond, or not knowing the answer to a question when one's brought up. So individual situations that these kids could relate to, and I think sometimes what happens, Doug, is when we have these kind of feelings of not being blank enough, not being good enough, smart enough, fast enough, you end up keeping them to yourself, and, these problems, whether they're individual problems or community problems, aren't best solved by yourself. And in fact, if we can find a way to talk about these as a community, and I think in the case of some of the kids that we're working with, they can kind of rely on each other. They'll realize that, hey, all of us kind of felt the same way you did, and talking about compensation is always really difficult. And, not knowing the answer when you should know the answer is always sort of a gut-wrenching experience. We've all been there, and here's how you can kind of get on with it, But I think it's having that dialogue in a way that I think has been productive. We did that same experiment with 20 kids at the Urban Scholars Program. So if you're familiar with the college-bound Urban Scholars Program, they'll grab 20 high-performing kids from Baltimore City and pretty much follow them through 4 years of college here in the Baltimore area. Fascinating stories. And when you listen to the responses from those kids, they'll say things like, standing up in public, being uncomfortable explaining to somebody what my past is. All of these things that if they would tell us, we'd know how to kind of get out in front of it. And so we've also found that it's an effective way to learn what it is that maybe people are feeling or what they're concerned about, and then try and put structures into place to help overcome them. Thanks for the question.
Other questions for Augie?
Yeah.
I have a question for you, and maybe this is more soliciting some of your advice. So, I'm not from Baltimore. I actually came down here from the Philadelphia market, Philadelphia, South Jersey, Delaware market. And I took the opportunity because I believe in the vision, the future of really what's going on down here. However, I get a chance to talk to two camps. I have a smaller organization that I'm here and trusted to grow, and that organization of the prior leadership didn't have the belief of what we could be. So I'm trying to convince that camp that, hey, look, you know what, you have a great opportunity right here to do something really special. And then I have all of my peers from my 21-year career that says, Baltimore, geez, what are you doing?
Right.
Really? And I'm like, well, you don't understand what I see. So, I'm continuing to try to push out as much information. So maybe my question is, how can you help me as a local business leader really tell the story? Beyond what I'm trying to say, but from other leaders and other information that I can really share with my office locally and as we expand, but also to our peers that really should do business with us here, because we're doing some great things.
So you bring up a great question. And
Can you repeat that?
sure, the question is, how can we, I didn't catch your first name?
Dave.
How can we help Dave share with his company that Baltimore is still a great place and is a great place to invest in and to grow in light of all the other nonsense that's been going on? So here I'll give you Augie Chiasera's theory. So whether you choose to believe this or not, it's up to you, okay? That if you're going to change somebody's beliefs, okay, there need to be certain costs that are assigned to those, because there are benefits to ascribing to those beliefs, which is what they're kind of hanging on to. But there are also costs that are embedded in those beliefs about this community. And what I found is helpful is to really expand on and be very clear about what the costs are of believing in that way. And when those costs get severe enough, you'll start to be able to help, hopefully, that individual or that organization realize that those costs aren't worth it, and I'm going to go ahead and change my beliefs about what I believe. So I think about M&T, and the importance of this region and this community to the bank overall is massive. And so if we don't continue to make the kinds of investments in this community that we've made over the past 10 or 12 years, we are jeopardizing significantly the value creation that comes from this particular geography for the bank overall. And so I get asked that question all the time, not in a mean-spirited way at all, more or less in a way of concern about, like, is everything okay in Baltimore? And the more that we've talked about sort of the little slides that we had passed out that give a sense of what the real sentiment is here, and people come and visit, they can see that this is, you walk around the harbor, you walk around downtown, you get a sense of the vibrancy, and you can feel it. And so,
You know what else too? I try to push out a lot of the material I get from the Economic Council. So if there's other materials or other materials like that talk about our vibrance that's going on, I try to really push that out through all of my social media and in my conversations. So I guess I'm continuing to look for more of that information.
Great.
So if there's other places that I can gather that data, that would be
Well,
helpful.
Dave, you're not alone. This next week, this group we've organized with the Economic Alliance, the GBC, the Downtown Partnership, and Visit Baltimore, our number one agenda item is to put together this story in a way that each of you can take and share with your vendors, your customers, your employees, that this is still a great place to live, work, learn, and invest. But it's how you tell that story. Debbie.
I believe that all of us have really, really great things happening in Baltimore, Maryland, in our personal lives and in our business lives.
Right.
And I feel like it's our responsibility through our grassroots effort to really go out and share those stories and talk to people and share the great things. And I think that Mike Gill had this in mind, if you could explain to people what these pins mean.
Yes. I put this pin on so consciously this morning because I was going to be in front of this group, and I saw Alvin had it, Debbie has it. It's a bull. And I got this from Mike Gill, who's the head of economic development for the state. It's a bull with the Maryland flag around it. And when you hear Mike talk about it, he says, well, because I'm bullish on Maryland. And I'm bullish on Maryland, which is why I wore sort of my Maryland pin today with the bull on it. And we all need to be bullish on Maryland.
And I'm Diane.
Oh, Diane, I know you're Diane. She's a customer. She was a customer of ours. After this, Diane, thank you for your business. All right. Oh, yeah, Pat or Len?
I think one of the problems, Augie, is, as you point out in the beginning, all the negative press is all gets covered on TV.
That's right.
In every place. How do we get the positive comments, and even people in this room or outside would tell you what a great town this is, how people are, and all those things. How do we get that out there? Because nobody cares about that, and it's not sensationalism.
Right.
It's not what they call news nowadays.
Right.
It's so negative.
Yeah, Len, that's a great question. I got to believe that there's a certain cost of us not talking about this in a big enough way, and that is the cost of not getting out in front of and working through the problems that we experience as a city. And if we don't get on with it, we're going to be in the exact same spot as we've been in the next 10 or 15 years. So in my mind, it's not a cost worth taking on, and we need to understand and frame what it is that the problems are and start talking about them and getting them fixed. It's that simple, but it's that simple intellectually. It's very hard to get folks to think differently. But I hope we've gotten past some of the sort of this pathological modesty that you've heard in kind of the early part when I came down here 12 years ago. I do think there's far more optimism and bullishness in this community than what I've seen before. And I think that has a lot to do with, folks like myself who've come down here, chosen to make this community home for a whole bunch of reasons, and realize all the great things that are going on here and why we should be a part of it. I'll tell you this, we have not had a problem recruiting people to come to this community at all, because people, I think, still get excited about what this area represents.
Augie, I was really fascinated by the stat that you mentioned, the entrepreneurial spirit being number 2. And I think, especially those of us in this room here, our businesses are functioning in a very, a great area where we have been part of that entrepreneurial spirit. I think, it's about stimulating the economy. And you stimulate the economy, we actually have more jobs, and it allows our city to grow. And, like Glenn said, yes, the media can put a lot of emphasis on the negative. That's what they get paid to do. But I think as community leaders, we can all make a difference in a more positive way by simply, I mean, something as mentoring, even startups. You know, if you're an organization out there that's done well, you know, why aren't you taking someone else under your wing and mentoring them? Because it's not going to be a win-win unless you do that. And that's the way I think that we can actually make a difference in our community.
I think that's,
an opinion.
it's well said. I couldn't say it any better. You had a question?
Yeah, Con, add to Glenn, not to toot our horn, but there are some really great stories that are coming out of Baltimore. I don't know if you were here in the beginning for when I talked, but
I was.
we got our holiday giveaway got picked up by the Huffington Post, by Upworthy, and by ABC News.
Right.
There's a video that was shared that's been viewed over 1 million times. That is positive news, and the headline was, "This place out of Baltimore is changing men's lives." So the business leaders here can connect with those stories that are already happening and use your influence to promote that and to make it grow and have an even bigger impact.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I love the story you told at the beginning about how a kid's perspective can change from something as simple as how they dress and how they view themselves and what that allows them to believe about themselves, which then allows them to go into the world in a very, very different way. It's powerful, very powerful.
Augie, could you
Yeah.
talk about a little bit, because you may have some insights, I'm sure, current leadership here in Baltimore, in terms of the mayor's perspective? We're going to get a new mayor, you know, in the near future. Can you talk about where it is today and where you see it hopefully going in the future? But that, you know, also change the dynamic tremendously, different leadership.
Look, it's funny, you'll hear, you know, sometimes folks bemoan the fact that there are 12 or 13 people running on the Democratic side, right? I view that as really, really positive, and I think it's a reflection of this community here, that there are that many people that care so deeply about this city that they're willing to take on the slings and arrows of running for public office and all that stress and anxiety that brings with it. I applaud each and every one of them for what they're doing, because it takes an immense amount of courage, and frankly, our city and our community needs as much help as we can get. And I'll stand behind anybody that finds their way to the end of this, campaign trail here. Yep.
And to that point, my comment earlier, but I remember back in the 80s, I taught nationally for the American Institute of CPA, so I probably went to every state society in this country. And at the time, Mayor Schaefer, Peter and all, and I would go to those and people go, "Oh, Baltimore, what a great town, you guys are doing great things," because they saw the press coverage that was out in the media. We need that back here.
We do. I agree. Len, I agree. 95,000 stories since April. It's crazy. I'm sorry, Wendy had it's Wendy, right?
I would like to see.
Is it Wendy?
Wanda.
Wanda.
You got the W.
I got to do the same thing with... Exactly.
Just call me anything.
All right. Exactly, another ex-customer. Thanks, Doug.
But no, I would like to see the attitude change with our leadership. If anybody listened to the news after Hogan gave his State of the Union, where he preached bipartisan politics and let's work together, all we were exposed to was extreme negativity by the mayor and by the Baltimore County Executive. Instead of, it's me, 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 and you take it away, and you're not going to give us enough. And I am so tired of it. So tired of it. And all that does is really develop. I was very negative after I listened. I didn't want to hear anymore, but it only gives me more negative feelings toward the city, toward the leadership, and also the leadership in Baltimore County. They've got to understand, Republicans or Democrats, don't we want the same thing for our city?
Look, I think we terribly underserve our communities when we don't work together as a team. Because the reality is, when Baltimore succeeds, we all succeed. And that's how I think we need to think about kind of our role in the community here.
Are you considering running for mayor?
No, I'm not considering running for mayor.
You missed the turn off, so you could have been number 21.
I could have been number 14, right?
13 officially. Oh, I thought it was
As of yesterday.
I know.
I want to add to Wanda's comment. Wanda, I think, unfortunately, we all know the problem that you just mentioned is a problem that is going to probably get bigger, because also the new, millennials that are coming in with the entitlement. But I think, unfortunately, we're the parents that form that type of, attitude. But I really think it starts home. And for some of these children, they don't have those type of homes, like many of us are bringing our children up. So, that is the reason why I personally serve on many of the nonprofit boards where children are involved, simply because I believe that we have to start there to make a difference. So, again, another comment.
But we did do it before, because we had riots in 1968 here. And for that period of, 12 years, we came back and created a great city.
Well, and you're right. And,
Can't do it again.
Yes.
and you're not going to see, each of us are a link in this chain here. No, as much as our ego maybe wants to think we've got the way to figure it out, or there's one thing, life isn't that way. It's way too complicated. But each of us, I think, can play a really important link in changing the dialogue and changing the trajectory and, entering the world in a very, very different way that's far more productive and inclusive.
Yeah, just a perfect example. We had Secretary Gill, a great friend, here in September of last year. And you can see the change of attitude. Obviously he was sort of dragged in, kicking and screaming, he's a business person. But he talked about how the government will now look at businesses as their customer.
Right.
He was thanking us for being a customer. That's a whole new thought in the realm of government.
Well, for all of you, it comes so natural. It came natural, Doug, to start today by saying, thank you for your business, Doug. We appreciate it, because none of you take for granted, your customer. You can't afford to in this community or in this line of work. You can't. That's what we're here for. Yes?
My name's Rob. There's a mantra in our business, and it is, if you don't tell your story, someone else will. And when someone else tells your story, it won't be the story you want told. And this came up during the Lieutenant Governor's visit as well. And I talked to him about, what are the message points, right? What are we supposed to say to amplify this positive message? Those of us who lived in Baltimore all our lives, we know how great it is.
Right.
A lot of us in this room know how great it is and how great it can be. But the issue is you work with your committee that you're coming up with the downtown park
Yes.
and so forth. This has to be, the tier one has to be internally with the city and the metropolitan area, but how do you, on the national level, as Len pointed out, penetrate the CNNs and the MSNBCs and the Fox Newses and so on and so forth, to make sure that people from the outside look in and you don't become a Baltimore apologist every time you travel across the country.
Right.
So I can't tell you another time I travel, hey, where are you from? Baltimore. Hey, have you watched The Wire? What about homicide? Christ, those riots, have things calmed down yet? First 5 minutes, you're almost in a defensive posture. So the point I'm making is not that those questions are bad and we can't handle them, but it would be good to kind of have a Johnny One-Note approach from everybody.
Amen.
The top 2 to 3 things.
I hear you.
Everybody in the world know about Baltimore. And for some reason, all of us in this room can be to blame to a degree. I'd be more than happy to help participate in that committee, but we need to arm people with these message points to get out there and be the soldiers that talk about how important this place is and what a great place it is to live, work, and raise a family. So when I hear these conversations, it stirs up a little bit of emotion because we know how great it is. But I just would love to see leadership outside of the elected arena, because we all know that elected officials at times have 2 sides of the brain, get elected and re-elected, right?
Yeah.
But those folks who are looking around for a while, we can drumbeat that message. So I'm finished, but I just know how important it is to keep that tier 2 in mind.
I appreciate you sharing that story with me, because it gives me confidence when we sit down with other business leaders to talk about the importance of getting this message. Egos are a tricky thing, right? And sometimes people don't want to support an idea or a comment because it's not theirs. or didn't originate from them. And so this is where we are. I would argue that we don't necessarily have the luxury, because the costs of not acting mean that each of you and each of your businesses and your employees suffer because we haven't found a way to get at this messaging piece. There's a reason why, when we sent this note out last week, that top on the agenda is what are the 2 or 3 things that we're going to tell others from outside this community what it is that's special about this place. We get asked it all the time. As the economic, as the Economic Alliance, we end up talking to a lot of other companies and search consultants about why their company should consider Baltimore. So we get asked that question all the time. Except from the folks in Detroit, who've probably been going through it, to a far greater extent than we have. But they found a way to get out in front of it.
But they've learned, you can learn, as you know, from them.
Right. But it means, I personally think it starts from owning the problem and saying yes, which is part of this exercise we did about what it is that's really causing us to have the problems that we have, and talking about them and getting at it. Some of the responses here, just to share them with you, let's see here. I feel vulnerable because of the unemployment rate. Or, the city keeps asking for more and more entitlements for its residents, put people to work in public works, repairs, etc. Let them work and receive paychecks instead of the entitlement check. I'm afraid that my employees and I can get mugged or even killed. I don't trust the police to treat blacks fairly. Panhandlers at the main entrance gateway to the city. The stability of our economy. How Baltimore is viewed nationally. These are sentiments that my guess is many of you feel similar about, and sharing those with us gives at least me personally the data to go back and trying to get some movement and some momentum on changing that story and that trajectory.
I'll just mention one thing. Augie, all of our companies, it's about branding. What about branding Baltimore? It goes back to what Bob said earlier. Brand in such a way so that the messaging is consistent across, our state, and kind of bringing it back up. It sounds like a simple thing. I know there's a lot of work, but I think it may make a difference.
I think it would.
Yeah.
I agree.
And hire a Maryland firm to do it.
Hire a Maryland firm to do it. You got it. Amen. That's good. That's good.
No, the last time Ms. Baltimore branded, they hired somebody from out of state. It's ridiculous.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Sillier.
So, I'm Vasilios. I was born here up the street, son of Greek immigrant. I love the place. We can talk about Baltimore being great forever and ever and ever. And I think Rob's on CNN, and I love it. I will turn to CNN to watch it because Rob's on the talking about places. And I agree with everything he says, but I envision we're going to go out and make all this big pitch. And one thing we have to tackle somehow is what happens the day that there's another riot. And we have 6 trials created by my fellow lawyers, right? And what are we doing to make sure there aren't 6 more riots? Because no matter how brilliant all of you are, and how brilliant you tell the story, and every branding firm out here does whatever, if you don't solve that problem, all our work will be damaged significantly every time that happens again.
Look, I'm reminded of our contact in Detroit that said that the way we fix our PR problem is to fix our problem. And part of the reason why I asked you to share with me your problems is that we can get on with fixing your problems, because I think we fix those and the rest of the stuff takes care of itself.
Oh, but this is going to be the big one. Because we can work hard, and if we don't have that fixed, then I can't stop the media from covering it however they want to. And you can re-spin it, and you can call Rob and go into crisis management mode, but even the most brilliant won't be able to turn it.
Following up on what Vasilios just said, we've got to figure out what are the root causes
That's right.
of the riots and solve that problem.
And look, and I think if I can use Michael's editorial as a indication of what he thinks the root cause is, it's economic opportunity, job readiness, and employment. That's when I read Michael's op-ed, that's what I read. And so how do we start creating jobs and creating a workforce that all of us can hire with confidence? Now, that's hard work.
And I agree with that. The only problem with that is you can't create enough jobs within however many months there are for the next trial in society.
No, I got it. You know,
I have a backup plan.
Augie, thank you for creating this.
So, well, one more.
Question.
I was going to say, on a positive note, we do have a lot of great development things going on, Under Armour.
We do.
The Port of Baltimore is, per acre, the largest port in the country, I believe. So, I think the plants are doing a good job marketing Baltimore on that.
They are. Look, there is a lot of positive in this as well, and that's, I think, the key, to kind of celebrate that and move forward. Doug, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for great dialogue. Tremendous, really appreciate it. Next meeting, folks, with the Baltimore Ravens, March 17th. Thank you all.